Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, More Than Just Monitor Mixing, presented by Eddie Caipo. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit your questions to the presenter and he'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. This webinar is being recorded and the link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Session Workshop series that can be found on pro.harman.com. We're adding new sessions daily, and right now we have over 30 sessions scheduled for this fall and winter, so watch for those on the calendar. And now I'd like to introduce you to Eddie, the presenter for today's webinar. As a mixing engineer, Eddie El Brujo Caipo has worked with some of the biggest names in the music industry. He is currently the monitor engineer for Enrique Iglesias and has also mixed for artists such as Gwen Stefani, Christina Aguilera, Smash Mouth, Tears for Fears, Julio Iglesias, and many more. And now I'll pass it over to you, Eddie.
Hi, Laura. Thank you for having me. I just want to say thank you, JBL and Harman, for the invitation to do this webinar. I'm going to start by just telling a little bit about myself and who I have worked for, have the blessing of working with, and with those experiences, what I've been able to develop throughout the years, and that's what I want to share with you guys today. So I've been very fortunate to work with artists like Laura was mentioning, Enrique Iglesias, Gwen Stefani, Christina Aguilera, Julio, and Tears for Fears. All these artists, even though they're very different, they do have something in common. You know, they all have a certain wants and needs when it comes to monitor mixing or just mixing in general, you know, with what they're used to listening to and what they want to hear. So that's some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. I'll give you a little bit of background of myself and so you can understand a little bit more how I got to where I'm at now. Where it all started for me, you know, I grew up in Peru. My parents own like a nightclub where they have shows, 4 or 5 different artists a night. My dad is a musician, my brother a musician, my cousins, everybody on my dad's side, musicians, producers. So I was around it all the time. And I felt that immediately that connection with audio, you know, and I think that was important for me because that created that path, you know, and I had access to everything that I needed. I had all the tools necessary in front of me. So I was very fortunate that way. You know, and I did all the, you know, few steps after that, of course, you know, reading tons of books and everything. I'm self-taught and you know, working on my dad's place and then mixing my brother's bands and recording my brother and all these things definitely helped me start developing more of an interest in learning everything related to sound. Granted, because I had the access, I always, you know, kept learning and messing with things and trying new things. Of course, without the knowledge of maybe a lot of the theory, even though I kept learning as I went along, you know, reading books and buying books for sound and just learning from that. But to be able to apply it in the technology wasn't quite there in South America. You know, I was only able to do so much. The good thing with this is I was always involved in doing studio and live sound, always in parallel. I was always doing both, which, you know, allow me to learn several things, you know, different mixing techniques, different, you know, recording techniques, different approaches when working with artists. I feel that that's something that I would always recommend people to try out. Like, I know a lot of times people just do live sound or studio, but I think it's important to be able to do both. And maybe focus on one at a time per se, but definitely learn the best things from both. I believe that working in the studio helps you a lot to how to deal with artists. You know, you learn how to deal with artists, how to deal with what they need, and how to approach them, how to be able to, you know, be direct with them and things like that. And, you know, as I move forward, you know, I did all kinds of other stuff like jingles and things like that. But the one thing I've learned once I relocated back to the States is that, you know, as I say there on the slide, I know that I know nothing. I realized very quickly that everything that I thought I knew as a teenager or 18-year-old, I was lost once I came here. So the learning curve was very steep once I got back to the States and was in front of all this amazing technology and amazing engineers, you know. So it was definitely a humbling experience once I started pursuing this professionally. I do have to say there was one of the concerts, one of my trips, this is just a quick anecdote, when I was traveling to the US, I believe it was maybe 89 or 90, I went to see Rush, and they were touring, I think, the album Presto. And if I'm not mistaken, and I hope I don't have this wrong, I believe Robert Scoville was mixing that tour. And that was also a defining moment for me when I saw and heard that concert. It was absolutely mind-blowing. So that definitely sealed the deal for me in what I wanted to pursue. So fast forward to some of the things that I like to cover today. Like I mentioned before, the similarities in the approach on what I do in the studio and live, especially now that I'm doing monitors for the most part. I think it works out pretty good. All the experience that I've been able to gather, you know, working in the studio, applying it live and dealing with artists live when it comes to mixing their in-ears. It's basically like prepping a headphone mix for them. So that's really important to me. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, preparing for a new gig. What are the steps to be ahead of the game? We'll talk a little bit about prepping your show file offline, among other ways of prepping and information that you want to get from artists. Challenges with A-list artists and any upcoming artists. The other topic we'll talk about a little bit is virtual soundcheck and snapshots. Very important topic because it allows you to prepare them further or fine-tune your mixes. And we'll discuss that further in detail in a few minutes. Processing your IEMs, and this is with, you know, compression or creating space, any kind of, you know, processing that you need to do to make the artist feel more comfortable in the inner mixes. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Something that I do apply quite a bit, and it's something that I think most people don't think about when mixing in-ears, is this occlusion effect. And I'll discuss how I deal with that portion of it. After that, we'll talk a little bit about your responsibilities as the monitor engineer and what you should do. And if we get to it, we'll talk a little bit about our talkback setup that I try to always have with my artists and musicians around them. Let's see. Okay, so here's a good parallel of how I envision a little bit about studio versus live sound, or versus monitors in my case lately. You know, we both now in live sound and studio, we use plugins, which are great tools for us to create and shape sounds as we need them. So that's something that they have similar, that we can apply them. In fact, I usually, even presets that I make in the studio, I take with me live, whether it's a reverb preset or you know, some kind of compression or EQ or something kind of specific that I really enjoy using. I usually bring it live and start applying it. And for the most part, it works. I may have to fine tune a couple of things, and it's a pretty good platform to be able to do that, you know. And that goes both ways. You can either do something live that you can bring back to the studio and try it out, see if it works out. And for the most part, it does, especially when working with in-ears. So presets, very important to save your presets, bring them with you, and just try to apply them. And another thing is when an artist finishes an album, and they, of course, been mixing in the box or finishing the production, you can always request, if there's something very specific about that artist, any specific effect on the vocal or on a drum or a guitar, you can always request the preset from the mixing engineer or from the producer, whoever developed that particular sound that you're looking for, and they'll send you a preset and then you can use it live. So that's an amazing tool to have as well. Another comparison will be that in the studio, you only have one mix that you're doing at a time, Of course, unless you're tracking, which you're giving people headphone mixes, but as far as making the actual mix, it's one mix, and that's what comes out in stereo, and that's it, right? In monitors, we have multiple mixes. I believe I'm running at least 16 stereo mixes, at least, like with Enrique, and plus production mixes and stage manager mixes and video mixes and all these other things. But as far as all the music side, so it's, and every mix is different. Every mix will have their own levels, their own panning. So that's something that to consider. You need to be aware and able to do multiple mixes, and they're all most likely are going to be very different. We can't just force one to be the same as the other or anything like that. So those are two good comparisons there. In the studio, of course, you can edit, you can redo things, you can fix all kinds of stuff, timing or any kind of edit. Where live, if you miss a cue, which I usually have a lot of stuff, if you're watching me mix, you'll see that I'm constantly moving things, and whatever's not recalling a snapshot, I'm moving live for the most part. And if I miss something, if I get distracted by anything and I just miss that cue, then it's gone. It already passed. There's no going back. And sometimes, if it's a very important cue, then your artist, you might get the look, or you may get a conversation after if it was an important cue, So it's very important to keep that in mind as well. You only have one pass at it, one chance to do it, and it has to be done right from the beginning. After that, of course, you got the creative participation in the studio, which is excellent because you're part of that process. You're part of developing that sound, which is an incredible feeling when you're participating with something like that eventually more people are going to listen to. And then once you take it live, you have that creative part has been done. So now all I have to do is, discuss this with the artist, see what they're looking for, and basically just try to reproduce that, which is, like I said on the slide, in the studio, we're going to capture that vision. We're going to make sure we get all that information from the production, capture it, mix it to the artist's vision. And then when it comes to live sound, and in my case, monitors, I'm trying to reproduce what they did on the album. A lot of times, and I'll talk about that also in a few minutes, it's not always an album mix that an artist or a musician is looking for. It might just be just something that is good enough for them to hear themselves while they're performing. So, so capturing the artist's vision and reproducing it live. That's some of the comparisons that I can make between studio and live sound, in my case, monitors. So preparing for clients. Obviously, the norm is, you request the artist tech writer. I usually wouldn't come in and just change anything. The only thing I might request is perhaps the console that is the one that I use, specific tools like that. But as far as changing everything, inputs or microphones, I will usually just roll with what they have to start with. And if everything goes well and you work in there for a little while, then if you want to make some changes to improve something, most of the time they're very welcoming, and you can just change it and make it be whatever you need it to be. So that is something that is very important. Get familiar with the writer, get familiar with all the technical aspects. I even read a lot of the stuff that is maybe not fully related to sound. I want to get familiar with all the staging and all the other things where, sometimes even when the lights are going to be out, they're going to be lights blocking anything or in the way of me being able to see my artist or things like that, just so we can discuss that with production. That's very important to me, be able to see my artist at all times. So anything related that will affect sound or my performance with the artist is always open for discussion, and I think it's important to be able to discuss that as a team with your production peers. Another thing that I do a lot is study the artist's music, and I watch a lot of videos. And now, of course, we have access to that. Back in the day, we did not. We will have to either, go buy a DVD or something of their concerts or things like that, or somehow research that or request it. A lot of times we will request, send us the material, and they will send you the material if they have a different version of the songs. But now, YouTube and all these things on the internet we can use, it makes it very easy. All we got to do is, sit there for a little bit and take notes and listen and just prepare. For me, the videos are useful because I can see the artist's mannerisms or if they're doing hand signals on previous concerts to the monitor engineers, and then try to understand them. Of course, at this point, a lot of the signals are usually the same for some artists, but they all have something unique, and they all have a way of saying things when they need something, or if they're uncomfortable on stage, or if you can start getting familiar with their facial expressions. Something I do that helps me a lot is I always have a multi-view video screen in front of my monitor board, and I can see every camera angle with my artist, and that helps me, again, watch their facial expressions. I can tell just by their facial expressions after many years of working with them if something's not right. And I can literally just ask them on the talkback if everything's okay during a quick break or something, and they might say no, or the little something fell off of the mic, or I need a spare, whatever. It could be anything. But knowing your artist to that degree, I find it to be crucial. So study the music, because at the end of the day, we can discuss technical stuff forever, but we're mixing music. They don't care. Artists are not going to care if you tell them, well, what happens is, I lower 3 dB on 5K, and then I change the compression from 4 to 1 to 3 to 1. They look at you and go like, I don't care. Just make it sound good, And same for if you're mixing for the house for the audience. Nobody in the audience is going to be sitting there with an analyzer or just with a smart system or whatever, just analyzing the sound. They're just going to go there and listen to music. So same with the artists. When they're performing, they don't want to worry about the technical stuff. They just want to be able to sing and that it's comfortable to them. So study their music. Make sure you learn all the cues, solos, little bells and whistles that the music has. And if you have that available for the show, use them, pan them, make them embellish their mix. I wouldn't, just let it sit there, So study the music, study the videos. Creating a show file, super important. Throughout the years, of course, using digital consoles, I've always been storing things, and when I have the opportunity to work with another artist, I usually grab stuff that I've already been using and create some form of template that I can use for a new artist. And that saves you hours of work. And also makes it seem like you pulled up a mix very quickly. There is no need to start from zero anymore, in my opinion. we have the technology to do it. You know, you have the opportunity to just be offline in a hotel room, on a plane, on a plane, 12-hour plane ride somewhere to a gig. I could be working and creating a full show file, and be very close of something that is usable, at least to start sound check without having to go kick drum, snare drum, starting from scratch. That's just, that's something I stopped doing a long time ago. So creating a show file, very important. It allows you to basically put everything in place except for, I believe, plugins in most cases. So for the most part, if the plugins are already on your show file that you're transferring, then yes, you can kind of still keep in there. But other than that, everything else you can recall, gains and even mixes and things like that. So very useful to prepare offline. And that's, I would say half the battle too there as far as getting ready, for an artist. Configure your console to meet the production demands. What I mean by that is basically everything that has to do for the show. Besides everything that you're mixing for the artist, there's a lot of other things going on. You have mixes for lighting, video, production, stage managers, radios. I got, radio come in, you have comm, you have, all this other information, or you have a separate mix for a guest, you have a pyro mix, you have all these things that you're gonna need that are not necessarily part of the mixing the music, but are things that you can send people to help them do their part during the show. So preparing for that is also very useful and also helpful to make the big, I guess, the goal that the whole show turns out really good. So everybody has to work together, and then you basically providing that information, anything that they need to hear for them to do each department for them to do their job. So I think that's something very important too. Then we move on to, of course, labeling channels, inputs, outputs, configuring any layout that you have. All those things come in play. Now, these things might seem redundant for some people, but I just find them to be very important. I just believe that preparation is key. Yeah, we were very fast with the console, and we can probably do it all from scratch. But a lot of times we don't have that time. A lot of times you get put in a gig where the artist won't even show up for sound check for the first time, and then you're just, okay, so I guess I have to be ready for the first song, So doing these steps have helped me be always ahead of the game. So I find these to be very important. Customizing patch, if you're going to festival or anything like that, and you already have your gains set up and you have to repatch everything. As you know, the gains follow the head amp from the stage rack. So if you have to patch differently, store a gain snapshot in your console so you can recall it, and all your gains will remain unchanged. And I'll explain a little bit more of that when we're dealing with snapshots. I mentioned earlier loading the necessary plugins when you're able to. Any previously made presets for EQ, dynamics, or plugins. If you're able to prepare with a console, of course, then that makes it a lot easier. If you're preparing offline, then the plugin portion you won't be able to do. But if you're preparing with a console, then it's very easy to just recall all these presets, put the plugins in place, and load it up. I have presets that I made for kick drums, snare drums, bass, guitars, background vocals, lead vocals, different chains that I have. So, at the end of the day, you can see that most drummers will hit the kick drum and the snare about the same level. So at least it's a good starting point if you recall a whole channel strip preset with the gain setup, and you already know what mic you're going to be using, and you have a preset for that particular mic, then everything's already set. So you'll have pretty much a mix kind of up and running before they even hit a note. And they might tell you, well, now bring the toms down a little bit. Okay, now bring the very light stuff, but you know that based on your gains and the mics that you're using, then your dynamics are going to be hitting at a certain level. and your effects are going to be hitting a certain level, and your EQ is reacting a certain way with those mics. So you're already 80% there, I would say, and then you just fine tune it. Again, that saves you tons of time. It has helped me many times where they allocate sometimes 2 hours for an artist sound check, and we're done in 10 minutes, you know. So it's been a good thing to do that preparation for sure. And then of course, when you do all that, you just save it on your USB stick, and you're good. You're good to go. You're good to go to the next show. As you move forward, as you start doing shows, of course, I usually start saving all these different shows. I don't override them necessarily. In case there's something that I like and I want to go back to one particular show, I can grab that information that I wanted. But yeah, just start saving your shows there, or any changes that you feel are worth saving, whether it's your presets. As you continue to work with the artist, you can have a preset when it's an arena show, and then a channel strip preset when you're doing like a private event for 20 people. You adjust those settings, and then you can have them stored. So when you go to those gigs, very quickly you can just make an adjustment without having to check it or test it. And you can always fine tune. You can always fine tune as you go along, but at least you're more than halfway there. Let's see. Okay, here's some challenges and goals, I guess, when mixing with monitors, mixing for monitors for artists. Their music style, like I said before, when I was telling you, as I was growing up and working with all this stuff with my dad and my brothers and all these different projects that I've done, and then as I was coming back to the States and working with different bands and artists and clubs, you get familiar with all these genres of music. So I find that to be very useful too. Yes, there are engineers that are dedicated to do, metal or rock, and that's where they stand out. And I, of course, love mixing rock music and pop music. But I think being familiar with all styles and understanding all styles of music, I think is very important. I think that whatever situation you put in, even if you don't know that style, you should, if you have the time, research about it so you understand what needs to sit in what place, excuse me, in the mix. Don't just try to wing it and say, well, this is not what I mixed, but I guess I'll just turn this up and put it up there. And, all you need is really to hear one song within that style. When Enrique started doing, for instance, getting into that reggaeton style a little bit, I started researching a little bit and how what sits where, what is being featured on these mixes, because it's a completely different vibe. It's a completely different style, or when I'm mixing, the Kings of Chaos, then of course it's more of a rock thing. It's a lot of guitars, kick and snare, and it's just a different thing. So understanding the music will help you, as it's helped me, deliver that to your artists. If you give them something that's very unbalanced, they'll know right away. They may not know how to tell you, but they'll be like, something's just not right. Like, it doesn't feel right. If I go from mixing, a rock artist and then I go mix salsa, I can't approach the salsa mix like I'm doing my rock mix. It has to be different. Things will react different. The instrumentation will react different. So all those things are to consider. One goal that I do have when working with artists is to always try to get them to not run, artists and all the musicians with them, not to run their body packs too loud. I try to create a mix where there's perceived loudness. So they can run their packs a lot lower, but it just feels louder. You can hear everything. Almost as when you always test your mix in the studio, but at a very quiet level. Similar to that. Of course, I have to keep in mind, the noise of the PA and the crowd, things that could potentially overwhelm their mix, which is why we've got to find a sweet spot. But I definitely try to encourage them to not turn just the pack really loud and then say, man, everything's really loud. Well, yeah, everything's loud. Let's just let's just start a little lower, and you can always turn it up. So a goal of mine is to always encourage them to not run their body packs so loud. You can always go louder, but if you start loud, you would only get even louder. And then your ears get fatigued, and then it's just a vicious circle. Something else that is very important for me when mixing in-ears is creating space. And that's a tricky one because I've seen a lot of people in the past when they were going to try in-ears, they try them, and the guitars are mic'd up or whatever, and they hear the guitar very direct, and they go, oh no, this just sounds horrible, because they're used to hearing it, even though you haven't done anything to it. You just maybe high-passed it, and they just basically don't like it because it sounds too direct in their ear. And if you think about it, the microphone is right on the speaker. That's what they're hearing. They can almost feel the air just pushing in their ear. So it's important to create that space. A lot of people have given up on in-ears because of that, because they're used to hearing it from far away. So there's been instances where I don't add effects to, let's say, a guitar, in the sense of like, oh, here's a guitar, junk, and there's reverb. I've added such a short room or like some kind of early reflection that is so tight that it almost gives you the sensation that it's a little further away, and that has helped people enjoy their sounds or guitars or whatever that sounds direct to them. It's helped them kind of get into it and understand or find that sweet spot where they can hear, the guitar, in this case, not so close. I do that with drums too. Sometimes I'll add an effect, but it's not necessarily for the snare to have a verb, but it really is to kind of create some kind of space so it doesn't sound so direct, hitting him in the head, So that's something that is pretty crucial, in my opinion, when you do an in-ears. Try to create the space. Same with vocals, There are artists who want them bone dry, and there are artists who want them really wet with reverb, and there's some that just want it to sound good in a certain place. I usually try to, most of the stuff we do is arenas or stadiums, things like that. I try to just recreate that. So if they're in an arena, then once they're plugged up, and because of the volume that they're running at, they're not really going to hear a lot of that reverb. So I just add that reverb to extend it, just so it sounds like where they are at, So they're standing in an arena, so now I try to make it sound like they're in there, just to extend what they're already seeing. To me, it's funny sometimes when the artist is seeing something, but it sounds completely different in their in-ears. I think it's important to, regardless of the type of mix that you're giving them, to kind of give them a sense of where they're standing at. That being said, and that's something that we'll discuss a little further, at the end of the day, this is, of course, a job of service. So it's whatever they want, and that's all that matters. But whenever possible, I try to recreate that space, or just try to make their sounds feel like they're not just direct in their ear, because that just makes it uncomfortable for them, or it just makes them feel isolated. Production, of course, there's different production demands, like we were saying earlier. Those are things those are challenges that we always have to keep up with. Changes in the production, changes on where you can be, on whether you can be on stage, you can be off stage, you're going to be under the stage. Do you have a visual of your artist? Any of those things, or the production demands of, like I said, location of where you are, or where the PA is going to be flown, and how it affects you. If you're doing a tour with a co-headlining, all these production demands. Are you going to be moving in a moving riser? Those are all things they're challenges that you have, but you just have to just rise above it and deal with those small situations that, at the end of the day, once you're set in position, or once you're mixing, none of it matters at that point, because you're just mixing your artist, and the show must go on. So, but just staying on top of that, staying on top of your team, your production team, and production managers, and everybody involved in what you do is a big part of it. I find it to be, sometimes not to say anything bad about it, but every now and then you'll find that some teams work separately and they don't really help each other, or if you need something, they may not, they may be like, well, there's nothing I can do. That's just the way it is. I'm very fortunate to work with many teams that even if I'm getting ready to mix and there's a light from the ciphers pointing straight at us, like 4 or 5 lights, and I talk to Cassidy and tell him, our lighting director with Enrique, and I go, hey, look, just 2 of those lights are just literally, and I can't see anything. I'm blinded. I can't even see Enrique or nothing. And even though I have the multi-view, I still, whenever possible, I like to see him directly. And then you ask, okay, absolutely. And they just make it's a small change, but now that allows me to do my job better. And if I do my job better and we keep our artists happy, everybody happy. So it's kind of like, we got to work as a team. Every department kind of helps each other out. And that was a little, and I even tell them, if you're going to make this change, make sure it doesn't affect the look that you're going for. But it goes, no problem. This is very easy, boom. And when you have a team like that, then it makes your job a lot easier and you're comfortable mixing your artists. Instrumentation, of course, very important to keep in mind. What instruments are you working with? Horns, old keyboards, some tracks, big heavy guitars, nylon guitars, steel string guitars. All those things are important to keep in mind. Sometimes they're challenging to deal with. Sometimes certain tones, certain things could be difficult to process. But again, we have the technology to do it. We can automate the console. We have, most of the time, rehearsal time, that we can fine tune these things. We spend a lot of time working with, in our case, with pedal boards and things like that, programming them so everything comes out accurate with the right sounds, with the right levels. If a drum is not sounding right, Brad and I, Brad is our front of house engineer, we can discuss it, and then we go to our musicians or artists and say, look, maybe this floor toms could use a little help here, or we can do that, or what about this percussion? We discuss things and we work them out, as a team, and it just makes it for a better mix at front of house and monitor. So keeping an eye on the instrumentation and how you work from the source and balance all that out in the mixes. Also, it's something that could be challenging, but if you handle it right, then it's very useful. The artist or musician's preference is what I was saying earlier, as far as what they want may not be what you think is best. Like, you may say, well, your mix should be like this, but at the end of the day, it's them who are performing. They're the ones who are going to tell you, well, this is what I feel I need to hear to perform. On this song, I need more of the piano because maybe I struggle with pitch on this song because it's, there are other elements, but give me more piano on that one and then I'm fine. So, and then the piano might be too loud. It might be it'd be unmusically loud. So you still got to do it because that's what they need. Or a musician will say, I need more click or whatever, So something to always keep in mind, that this is a job of service. When you're doing monitors, it's what they want, not what we feel is best. A lot of times, you make suggestions, or if an artist or a musician was always, their mixes were always not, in your opinion, as good, or they could be better maybe within what they had, and you can have them try something. And for the most part, it's been a successful event because they will enjoy something, and they saw that you put the time and they actually enjoy what they're hearing. Or sometimes I have them come in earlier and I do virtual sound check and play back the show from before without their instrument, and then they play on top of it and we dial up a new mix just for them. So putting in the time makes it worthwhile for them, and it makes it for a more pleasant show for them as well. Again, utility mix or music mix. I keep reinforcing this for some reason. Utility mix, basically someone who just wants click, guitar, and their vocal. That's it. Nothing musical about it. They just need to keep time, have some kind of pitch reference, and their own vocal. There are instances that for Enrique's mix is like that, because he travels a lot, he goes a lot into the audience. We also have a C stage, which is behind front of house. So you can imagine the delay and the slapback that we get bleeding through his mic. So for the most part, when we do that C stage, which is like the acoustic set, for the most part, it's just his vocal, one pitch instrument, and click. And the click is fairly loud for those songs because there's, it's the only one thing that is not coming out of the PA. It's the one thing that is an individual reference that is strictly for him. So that helps him just stay in time. And even though every now and then he'll take his right ear out, he still has the click, obviously, he has the click on both ears, but just having the click, he's still able to keep track of where he's at, regardless of the PA blowing right at him. So that's what I consider like a utility mix, something that is just useful for you to kind of get through the gig, like it's not a record mix, it's not like anything special, or not a music mix, if you will. But then there are other members or other artists that like that, like Gwen Stefani likes me to do like a more of a music mix, I guess borderline with like a record mix, if you will. And band members like that too, some don't. I have drummers where we dial up the drums from sound check and everything's great, like on the first gig, and the drum tech's like, man, he's gonna love this, sounds so good in the in-ears, this and that. The drummer shows up, he realizes that the drums are in the ears, he goes, please remove all my drums from my in-ears. I'm like, really? It's like, yeah. So removing all the drums, he wanted just to hear everything else except for himself. And that's his choice, I'm not there to argue about it, I'm just there to give him what he needs. So it's to each his own, and we just gotta mix and keep them happy. And if everybody in every position is getting exactly what they need, they're gonna perform great, which means we'll have a great show, which is ultimately the goal. Artist placement, very briefly, is where you want to position things. For the most part, like drummers, they want the drums, their perspective, of course. If there's a guitar player, stage right, then, pan that guy right, the stage left guitar player left, and things like that, kind of to place things how they see it. And it kind of, because you're so isolated, it kind of makes sense when you do that, because then as you move and you just turn, it kind of looks that way. I know there's systems now, like the Clang, and which I haven't used, but I've heard so many great things about it, where you can place things even on the third dimension, so you can actually put things here, there, and so that's of course another side to it. But I usually try to at least place them, wherever they see each other. Of course, if they turn around, that changes slightly, but for the most part, they're facing forward. So that's not an issue. But placing them also helps you clean up their mix, because you're not crowding everything in the middle. So panning things is also very helpful to keep a clean mix. There's times that even someone says, hey, can you give me a little more click? And it's kind of already maybe loud in the mix. I just pan it very slightly left or right, and all of a sudden they go, oh, perfect. And it's just, all I did was, by moving it slightly, just clean it up, and it just kind of popped up, and I didn't affect his general mix. Because if you start adding too much click to a mix, it just kind of ruins the actual music side of the mix. But again, if they want to hear it, they'll get it. Let's see, was it psychology? Yes. I feel that at least half the battle of mixing monitors is a very psychological thing. It's about, knowing how to talk to the artists and band members, not dismissing what they're asking. You have to just know, I guess, how to talk to them. That's something that I learned from the studio days. Being in a room with an artist for hours and hours, you get to see, their strength, their weaknesses, their anything that makes them, insecure about things or anything. So you get to know them, right? And they get to know you, of course. And this is very crucial when doing monitors. You gotta be able to know how to interact. You can't just be like either stone face or just kind of like not care. If an artist is telling you, hey, it kind of sounds like this, and but I don't know how to explain it, and they get frustrated and they want to walk away. Knowing how to talk to them and make them understand that it's okay, that you're there, you got their back, that you're gonna be, you know, your goal is to make sure they can hear everything clearly, at a good volume, and you're gonna keep them safe from volume. You're gonna take care of them. You're gonna make sure that they're fine, you know. So that part is what I classify as the psychology part, like understanding how to talk to them, how to make them feel at ease without really, kissing their ass if anything, just kind of like just making them feel good about what they're about to do. I mean, when you think about it, going out there and performing for 80,000 people is not an easy task for anyone, you know? So I think it's important to understand that and always keep that in mind when you're talking to them. Don't dismiss it as like, oh, they're crazy. They want this to be brighter and blah, blah, blah. No, this is what they need. This is what makes them comfortable. So we're there to make them comfortable. So that's all part of that that I feel is important to know, and that has helped me have a good relationship with my artists. And I think um, you know keeping that, it's on the bottom of the list, but I will probably put that as one of the first things to always have in mind when you're working in this kind of in this department, at least in monitors. Okay, so snapshots, pretty cool feature from pretty much every console, any digital console. Back in the analog days, I used to literally reset full consoles for sounds and things, and I loved it. Of course, I was resetting sounds here and typing presets on the effects and changing compression settings on a per song basis, because I've always been a very active mixer. I've never been a set it and forget it. But snapshots, of course, helps me, immensely. So I usually have snapshots per song. Sometimes even within a song, I'll have two or three. For solos, I have snapshots that affect everybody. I have snapshots that only affect the guitar player maybe during the solo, or it affects two other mixes, guitar and drums, because maybe during that solo, the drummer also wants that guitar raised for the solo, and then back after the solo restore. But I'm on my artist mix. I can just go to that solo. It doesn't affect what I'm doing now. It affects them, and then when solo ends, I go to the next one, and then I'm back to my usual snapshot without affecting my live mix as I'm doing it. So that's a pretty cool feature, of course, that I use quite a bit. Again, you can make a snapshot per song or per sections, What gets stored and what gets recalled. Everything gets stored. Every time you hit store, everything gets stored into the console for that snapshot. So that's important to know, because I learned the hard way, of course. Everything gets stored that way, which is a good thing. But then what makes a difference is in what gets recalled is what you scope. And I believe that most digital consoles have this. I use an Avid SXL, so that's what I'm very familiar with, and that's how this one in particular works. Whatever is scoped, and if you can see on the screen, the three red selections that are there, whatever is scoped are the ones that will be recalled for that particular snapshot. So that's pretty important, because then you can only, in my case, I usually just automate the aux sends, mutes, and plugins for the most part. Sometimes I'll do effect sends or, very rarely, but for the most part, plugins, mutes, and the auxes. And that basically enables me to do what I was saying earlier, that, no matter what I recall, the faders for the actual fader mode won't move. My gains won't change. EQ won't change. None of that will change unless I wanted to on a particular snapshot. I do have, however, some things on recall save that I will never want them to change. Things like talkbacks, production, sends and talkbacks, radios, things like that. I never want those to change no matter what happens. So I usually just enable the recall save on those. So not even by accident, I could be automating the talkback, because during our shows, there's a lot of communication happening via the talkbacks. And if for some reason one of my talkbacks was automated on the snapshot by accident, then they won't hear what they're saying, or someone who needs to hear a specific direction won't hear it. So I think it's important to be safe and I set those things that I don't want them to be touched at all, recall save. Snapshot edits, absolute and relative. Very useful tool. This is something that I use quite a bit. Let's just say, the drummer goes, give me, the guitar, stage left guitar, turn it down, 3 dB. And I go, well, do you want it just on this song, or you want it across the board? Across the board. Okay. So absolute, if I select to edit this on absolute, and the guitar, let's just say it's a 0 for sake of an example. The guitar is a 0, and he wants it 3 dB quieter, and I select all the snapshots, and I go 3 dB down and store it. All the snapshots will be at 3 dB, negative 3 dB. And that's absolute all across the board. But if he tells me, yeah, just do it across the board 3 dB, but on each of the snapshots, as you know, because I've been saving the snapshots per song, on one song the guitar might be at 0, on the other song it was at negative 3 already, and then on the other one was at negative 5 already. So what happens is, if I highlight all of them, I go relative, and I make that move that he asked me of negative 3 dB, then everything will go down in relation to where they were. The snapshot that had the guitar at 0 will go down to negative 3. The one that was at negative 5 will go down to negative 8, and so forth. So it's a great feature to have, because then you keep the relationship of all your snapshots the way we had it, but everything's just quieter by 3 dB. But everything's moving in the same way. All the automation remains. So it's a great feature. Aux monitors versus aux effects, like I said, I don't use that too much, but it's there to automate on the snapshot whether this is a send for your monitors or for your effects. Most of my effects are being automated on the returns. I just leave the auxes straight up anyways, and I just automate how much I want to hear on the return lines. So that's not that big of a deal in my scenario. Plugin automation. This is pretty cool, because obviously you can automate on your snapshots to do anything. So you can recall different presets, you can recall different settings. So that's also very useful. You have one song, more reverb, it's a ballad, so then you extend the reverb, you make the reverb longer, larger, more dense, and then you go back to the fast tempo song, then you shorten the reverb. For delays, tempo mapping, that's all there too. Each snapshot could be triggering a tempo map, so when you go to the next snapshot, your delay is already in time. That's something I use a lot with Gwen. She really enjoys using delays. In fact, I have the delays tempo map, and I switch it, of course, when the song ends, it gets switched to the next song, and the delay is already active, and she likes to hear it, so she's already engaging with the audience and everything, and she already feels the tempo of the song, so she's already kind of in the vibe of the next tempo of the song, so that's kind of a cool thing too. So plugin automation, obviously you can change the settings and do anything you want with it. and save them on a per snapshot basis, on a per song or per section, or things like that. I have, for instance, our guitars with Enrique are, we get all three guitars. We get a nylon, a steel string, and an electric, all coming down a stereo line. So I have plugins that are change depending on what song it is and what guitar they're playing. The settings change for that slightly depending on what we're looking for that particular song. So, so that's very helpful. A momentary snapshot, it's something that you can trigger and you can assign it to an event, like a function button. And basically, let's just say, you have some effects or plugin service or anything going on, and something happens, you lose power on that server or whatever. I can just, with a touch of a button, I can have it disengage anything that is an insert, whether it's outboard or plugins outside of the console, and engage EQs and dynamics in the console that I have previously preset to be as close as possible as what I'm doing with the plugins. So, and the best part is that it allows you to trigger that with a snapshot, but it doesn't change your timeline. So if you're in a certain song and you trigger this other snapshot, it doesn't take you away from following your show. Everything stays the same. All it did is you use the snapshot functionality to trigger an event, a function for you to change this while you're rebooting something. And then once you're back, you click it again, everything reverts and it crossfades into your other settings. So that's been a very useful tool as well. So EQing, there's obviously, correcting something, adding filters to something that needs to be fixed. That's what I, qualifying as corrective EQ. If you need to hype at something because it's too rumbly or something actually has, it's too bright, just to fix something, that's where I will apply that, mostly a filter EQ. And then I have, of course, anything that I use for tone, which I usually like broad strokes. I usually like wide bands when I'm trying to find a certain tone of something. I don't mind being aggressive with EQ. So broad strokes with that, I'm always very, very at ease with that. So that's when you're trying to do something for a tone, something specific to create a certain tone. Subtractive EQ, of course, is when you focus on just cutting what you don't need and maybe raising the gain, and that basically gives you what you wanted in the first place. And you end up with what you wanted. Basically, just focusing on cutting what you don't want, when you don't necessarily need to boost anything. And of course, additive is when I'm just boosting things. Again, I don't mind being aggressive with EQ if needed. I think that's important. So if, at the end of the day, we're using our ears to mix, so it doesn't matter what it looks like as long as it sounds right. So that's kind of like very briefly kind of how I approach the EQ. Like I said, filters, to correct anything. After we correct it, then I kind of run through something to create a certain tone. And then if there's anything that needs to be taken out, obviously all of these are not in a chain. These are just as you need them, individually, or I might just correct something and then on top of that, I'll subtract something else that is just tonal, so it depends. I can use these in any form or combination. Oh, plugins. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that. Everything that I've been talking about so far is obviously things that have worked for me. There's no written in stone kind of rule about this stuff, but plugins are amazing tools. I use them quite a bit. And and they just have a different color. You know, we use different brands of plugins, different, you know, softwares and things that we use, but we use them because they all have a different color. If you remember the days when we're using all these racks, outboard gear, then that would give us a certain tone, more than just maybe a compressor, more than just the parameters of an actual EQ. A lot of the times it was a particular tone, a particular color. There's times that I will put a plugin in place strictly for the tone that it gives me just by going through it. I might not even be processing anything. Or if I do, it's very little. So it depends. But I guess my point is, you know, you can achieve great sound and a great mix for your artist without plugins. I'm not saying that you have to use plugins. These are just different colors that I use that you know, that have worked for me, you know. But you don't have to. Effects. So this is something that we mentioned earlier about creating space in the in-ears. So obviously, a lot of times we can use audience mics or room mics, and that's probably the most natural way of creating space. But then you can also encounter a lot of noise, a lot of unwanted noise throughout, you know, a performance. A lot of times I want my artist to feel the audience, but I'm usually writing it. Or every now and then, depending on the scenario that I'm in, I might automate it by sidechaining it. When he's singing, then it ducks the audience. When he stops singing, it brings the audience back up. But you got to find a sweet spot for that. So I rather usually manually write it after songs, or when people are singing along, I'll bring it in, and then I'll bring it back down. But that's mostly for audience sound. As far as creating the space, like I mentioned earlier, try to make them feel like what they're seeing. It's like when you see a broadcast, something on TV that, you know, they're playing somewhere big, and everything sounds like bone dry. It just doesn't go with what you're seeing. I think that's kind of like what we're trying to recreate. You know, the same way that, you know, everybody in doing Foley are trying to recreate all the little sounds that are outside, or that are, you know, all those sound design people that are trying to recreate things around you when you're watching a movie, just so it brings the viewer into that location, into that place where you know, where the actor is in this case. So that's what I mean by creating a space on the in-ear monitors. It's not to sound with a lot of reverb. It's not to sound with, you know, like you're in a church or something. It's just more to make you feel not so isolated or claustrophobic inside the in-ears. But then you also have reverbs that are just straight up, you know, you want a nice verb on the snare or the toms, or on the vocal, on the guitars, just for taste. It's, you know, all that helps. All those little things can embellish a mix. If the music calls for it, and if something that the artist likes, go ahead. You know, same with delays. Like I mentioned, you know, Enrique likes delays, Gwen likes delays and echoes, and, you know, as far as modulations and flanges, I will mostly use it if it's a special effect on a certain section, or when I'm doing from the house. I you know, use that a lot of, you know, doublers or chorusy stuff. I know Brad likes to use from the house. He uses like a little bit of flange on the bass, and I think that adds a cool sound. I actually might try that soon. And then distortion or saturation. I love distortion. I love saturating things as well. And so that's something I may add in certain places. Most of the time, you know, on the bass, you know, sometimes on drums, depending if the music calls for it, I'll add saturation. But it's definitely a sound that I like. So with this, you know, I will say it's not something that you need to feel that you need to hold back. If there's something that you can try that will benefit the sound of the music that you're mixing, try it out. You know, I think it's important to not only you know, capture and basically reproduce that sound, but feel free to always add your own vibe, your own element to it. I think artists appreciate that too, if you give it your own touch. as long as it's within the parameters of their music. Oh yeah, we talked about this earlier. Louder is not better. Loud doesn't give you a good mix. Um, Again, something that and I apply this even when I was mixing from a house. You know, you don't have to mix loud to have a good mix. I have made the mistake of mixing loud before. I didn't always mix at a good, healthy level, if you will. I've made my share of mistakes when it came to mixing as well. So, but I've learned throughout the years that louder is not better. And when it comes to in-ears, because the drivers are so close to the ear and they have full control of the volume on the pack, I think it's important to always emphasize that for your artists and musicians, that they should start with their pack quieter. I normally encourage them to start quiet and bring in the volume until they can hear themselves clearly but not loudly, and then we'll build their mix from there. Because then that teaches them that they don't have to be loud to hear themselves. It takes a while to get used to, and some do it, some don't. But if once you earn their trust, I think they'll listen to you when it comes to this, because you're not trying to hurt them. If anything, you're trying to protect them and take care of them, and be able to mix for them for a long time. So this brings me to the occlusion effect. This is something that is, I would say, not ignored, but people just kind of dismiss it, or maybe they don't know what it is, and they don't know why it happens. So let me try to, maybe I'll move this there. Basically, like right now, I'm wearing in-ears. If I was to turn off my microphone, my voice will sound like the image A. That's what I will feel it like. And I will start hearing myself through my bones and like vibrations and things like that. So it will basically, there's a boost like around 250 or so, like very wide, and then all the high end and high mids just go away. And you can, if you haven't experienced this, all you gotta do is put some earplugs in or put your fingers in there in your ears, and you'll notice it right away. So when you have artists tell you, man, my voice sounds muddy, and or you feel that they want their voice too bright, well, this is one of the reasons. And a lot of people used to ignore their art and say, man, this guy or this girl, whatever, they just want the stuff really bright. It's like, well, I actually, when I'm testing the microphone, and if you were to actually stand next to me when I'm mixing, you're gonna hear me singing or humming the song. And I do that in order to understand exactly what they're hearing. Because if I don't do that, to me, the voice sounds really thin and bright based on the EQ that I'm doing on B, on the image B. So, it's something that, most people, like I said, they just dismiss it or haven't really thought deeply about it. But understanding this has helped me understand them. Because yes, we can go ahead and try the mic. We go, oh, this sounds fine to me. But then you're not the one singing over there, and and then you have to add to that, if you're on a runway and then the PA is blowing right at the mic, or you're on top of the subs, you got some subs underneath, all this rumble, all these things, they couple, and they basically make it very unpleasant for whoever's performing. So I always keep in mind when the artists tell me it sounds muffled, it sounds like this, it's because of this issue, that when you're plugged up, you're blocking basically the way you receive the sound, the way it interprets the sound for you. So it's important to realize that it's not that it's too bright. It's just that's what they need. You got to balance it out, because what they hear without it is image A, and that's just not good. Now, there is a balance between how much, because you're probably thinking, why didn't you add the same amount of highs that are down on image A to image B? Because then there are other factors to consider. I'm compressing the vocal, I'm also his mix or her mix is also has a tonal EQ on the whole mix, so the mix might be a little brighter already. And by doing those things, it also allows me to keep his body pack down. So basically, we can run it brighter, but the volume of the pack is quieter. Instead of trying to run it louder at a flatter EQ curve, and all we're doing is just blasting them with volume. So this way, they can run the whole show and not get ear fatigued. Two of my artists used to get, their ears will ring. In fact, Enrique used to tell me that before his ears will ring, and Gwen as well. And when I joined their team, their ears don't ring anymore. So that's something that is pretty satisfying to know that this approach has helped them enjoy the show and then not have the aggravation later of any ringing or anything like that. So this is something to really look into for whoever wasn't familiar with, but at least consider it. Of course, there are variables. Different people, the way their body reacts will be different, so you can play with that frequency and kind of find that sweet spot of what makes it better for them. But this has definitely worked. Now, if you run this pack really, really hot, obviously then the balance goes away. But I'm trying to use what we hear or what they're hearing through their bones. I'm trying to use that as part of my game. So I'm using it in our favor. So the body of the vocal is coming from themselves, and I'm giving them just that crispiness, brightness that they're missing. So now it sounds even for them in their ears without being so loud. So anyway, that's the occlusion effect, and it's something that I just felt that it was being dismissed a little bit. So yeah, check it out, look into it, try to apply it. I think you'll have some good results. Okay, so responsibilities as a modern engineer. What I call the 3 C's. Communication, communication, and communication. That's absolutely key. You don't want to, there's always that moment where, you're working with a new artist and you kind of don't want to feel like you want to approach him right away, or or even sometimes, some camps, they don't want you to talk to the artist, that I've been in a situation like that I had to kind of break through, because that's how people end up losing their jobs within a day or two, because they're not able to communicate, or they'll tell 1 or 2 other people what they want, and then those 1 or 2 people tell another person, then they come and tell you. By the time it gets to you, not only did you miss the cue, but this is 3 people's interpretation of what the artist said. So for me, it's important to be able to have direct communication. No matter what happens, if you talk to them, even if they tell you that they don't know what they're saying, or they don't, whatever, because sometimes artists feel that they don't know, but they've been doing this a long time. They know. They just may not know the technical term for it, but that's for us to interpret. Our job is to interpret what they're saying. If they say, what, to me it needs to sound a little more blue, well, then my job is to figure out what blue is. And once I figure it out and they go, that's it. Okay, now I know that blue means maybe, I don't know, cutting 400 hertz. And for some reason, that's blue for them. I don't know. Or they, I want to sound like I'm in an arena no matter where we are. Okay, so you want reverb, and you want reverb like a long, lush reverb. So communicating with the artist. And if something went wrong, like, if you can see, like, this show didn't go well, they were complaining about stuff, don't wait till the next show, if possible. Don't wait till the next show, which could be a few days later or whatever, to ask about it. After the show, if you have the opportunity or that direct contact, go check in. How was it today? Was everything okay? Or because I noticed something, or and they'll tell you, oh, well, actually, when I went on the runway, maybe I kind of lost track. I couldn't hear this. Okay, so maybe I'll give you a little bit more of the click, We'll give you more drums. Oh, that'll be cool. Okay, cool. And then that establishes that trust. Doing monitors without trust is pointless. They have to trust you. Otherwise, it just won't work. So that's incredibly important, addressing the issues. Because otherwise, they can stew with it. They just be brewing with it and saying, oh, this guy's not it. There's something not right. And then they'll come in next time. You think everything went well. You're doing the same stuff. And they have the same problem. They're going to say they're not getting it. Find me someone else. But if they show that you care and that you actually went and took the time to say, hey, I noticed something, tell me what's up, makes a big difference. So communication, communication, and more communication. You can never have enough, in my opinion. And again, it already says in the second bullet point, building trust. That's a must. You don't have to go and be their buddies or nothing. I think it's always important to have a respectful or respectable professional distance, but building trust, you know, checking in with them, making sure they're okay, like I said before, and you know, that all goes a long way. Because once they trust you, all they need to know is that if they turn and they see you, they're fine. Even if they like I said before, a lot of artists have insecurities just like we do. And playing in front of thousands of people is not an easy task. So when they come out and they have the little nervous jitters or whatever they call it, or the butterflies, and they're like, they might have a small worry moment. And if you just turn sometimes and they see you that you're there and you're taking care of them and you got them, all of a sudden that alone might calm them down. And that's the whole part of the psychology and the building of trust and the communication, that they know that just by looking, okay, I'm good, I'm gonna be fine, you know, because they might be worrying, okay, I'm about to walk on the runway, is he gonna remember to turn those things up? You know, we got you, okay, good, and then they know. Or sometimes I'll hit a button, you know, where my talk back to my artist directly, no one else hears it, I go, we're good. Or my artist in between songs might ask me, is everything okay? Because I heard something like this, oh yeah, whatever, a guitar popped or something. Okay, cool, no problem. Like sometimes they want to know also because they're very aware of everything that's happening. You know, this is a big production. They don't happen magically. Besides the team, it's, you know, the artist is usually involved in everything that's happening. So when something is different, they'll know, you know. So again, building trust. Capture and reproduction of the sound that the artist and the musician are known for and are accustomed to. We discussed that earlier. Making sure that the way their music was recorded, the way it was mixed, and that sound that the audience knows, the sound that the musician and the artist is used to, being able to reproduce that somewhat, at the very least, in the balance of things, you know. If that's what they want, again, if they want a utility mix, then they'll get you a utility mix. But if someone wants something more like more balanced with all the instruments balanced and then their vocal on top or something like that, then yeah, so try to reproduce that as best as possible, respecting the delays and the reverbs and things like that they like and that were maybe part of it. You know, the little nuances of a little solo, a little piano lick here, a little synth, or a little guitar thing, all those things, trying to keep that in there so they feel like, oh, wow, the music is being mixed. It's not just like set it and forget it. That's like, I'm incredibly anti set it and forget it. Level consistency from the source, very important to me because, you know, at front of house, if some level changes on an instrument, they can very quickly just turn the fader up or down. And then with their time, they can adjust the gain if they need to. On monitors, if something changes, it affects, you know, 10 people on stage and another, you know, 6 or 7 off stage as far as what they're hearing. So if something dropped in level on the guitar or you know, something changing gain, it affects a lot of people. So we work really hard with our backline tags and with the musicians to make sure all the levels of pedal boards and keyboards, playback, or whatever it is, that is consistent wherever we go, that doesn't change. And if there's going to be a change, we kind of, not that approve it by committee, but we kind of like, we check it. We all want to hear it. We can't just make a change on the fly on the middle of a song on a show, because what if the gain jumps up and all of a sudden it hurts people's ears? So we kind of like, we check it, from the house. In this case, with Gwen, with Jim, and our guitar player, we check things, and so it's always a team thing, because you can't just do it always. It affects a lot of people. So level consistency is crucial. Having the same microphones, having the same DIs, and of course these are perfect scenarios, and I'm very fortunate that I get to have that for the last few years. But that makes a difference. If you have different mics and different DIs, different pedal boards every show, then of course you're going to be chasing your tail all the time, and you're going to have to be changing your gains and EQs constantly. But if you have those essentials with you at all times, microphones, DIs, your pedal boards, just the guitars even, because we don't use amps, we just use pedals. It's consistent. We can literally plug in and go and not even worry about it. And then, of course, the most important one is to ensure that our artists and our musicians are comfortable on stage. That's just a priority, because if they perform right, the audience will love it. If the audience loves it, the artist feels that, and they're going to leave happy. They're going to be just thrilled that we had a good show, that everything worked out really good. So that's key. Doesn't matter if your whole world could be collapsing here on our side. It's important that, that you deliver. You deliver to the musicians and to the artists that sound that they need to perform, that they're comfortable, so they can just perform and have a great show. So that's obviously very important. And this is something we said earlier when we were talking about the EQ. Mix with your ears and not with your eyes. It's funny, but it's incredibly true. I even had a friend of mine, engineer, who came to visit me one time for a show, and he saw my EQs, and like I explained earlier, how I like to do very broad strokes and sometimes like very wide cues and for tonal purposes. And he goes, "Man, you're cutting that much on this, and wow, you're boosting this much on, 16K for the vocal." Like, I'm like, yeah. I mean, and he was just looking at it at this point. And then then he listened to the mixes, and he was like, "Oh, wow. It sounds so much better than it looks." So that's kind of like, and I made that mistake too. I used to, as I'm EQing, I used to just look at it. And you got caught up on that once all this digital stuff came about and plugins and things like that. You kind of have to look at it, but at the end of the day, you gotta stick with your ears. You have to, because what's on the screen is just a graphic representation, for the computer to know where you're at, but there are other variables. It's still coming out to speakers or to earphones. There are other variables that are gonna make you adjust a certain way. So again, mix with your ears, not with your eyes. Oh, so I guess before that, I was gonna show you guys a little bit of stuff on in Pro Tools, so I can show you some of the processing that I have. So I'm gonna start sharing a screen, if that's okay. Let's see here. So just so you see a little bit of the chain that I have here, I don't know how it's translated via Zoom, but I have the SSL G-bus compressor just for a little bit of gluing. After that, I add a little bit of, brightness to the overall mix, and that allows me to not EQ too much of the inputs because I create a certain curve for the whole mix. After that, I have like a stereo imager with an MSEQ, Plug-in Alliance and Brainworks, which is pretty awesome actually. And this, you see this air that I'm adding here? That's just on the sides. It's not even in the center. So it's a pretty cool thing to be able to EQ things in mid-side. And then here, I take out, a little bit of like 315 or so, just to take a little bit of that mud. Again, this is one of the corrective things that I was talking about earlier. This part will be more of a tonal thing, and this is a corrective thing for the middle of his mix. So that leaves me room to put a lead vocal there, and it cleans it up a little bit. And everybody's very close to that. For guitar, I use the CLA mixdown, also the stereo imager, and a little bit of that air, and a little bit of the corrective EQ. And all my mixes always end with the ML4000 limiter. This limiter is great, and on top of that, it has a 4-band multi-band compressor. So if any frequencies start kind of getting a little too crowded, I can just apply this particular. In this case, I was doing it a little bit on the high mids. And sometimes, depending on the venue that we're in, if it gets a little too muddy, instead of changing the mix, I just start compressing the low mids, which you can see what is covering here. And it just helps. It just cleans it up a little bit. So all my inner mixes always end up with that. And, it's a final stage before I hit the actual inner unit. And it also keeps it with no clipping. It keeps it really tight to try to not hurt their ears, and always keep it at a certain level. So let's see here. Let me play a little more, and I'm going to solo a couple things more. Cool. Well, at this point, I would like to, Laura, if I can open this up for perhaps any questions that anybody may have.
You bet. We did have some questions come in. So the first question is asking, what plugins do you use?
Okay, so in anything in particular or just in general, I guess they asked for it.
It didn't specify, sorry.
Okay. Well, I use a lot of Waves stuff. I use Plugin Alliance, MacDSP, Empirical Labs. Definitely some of my favorites are the SSL bus compressor. It's what I was showing earlier. The Puke Tech. It's great for broad strokes EQ, and of course the BrainWorks MS EQ, the Plugin Alliance. And my ultimate favorite is, of course, the ML4000 that I always have on mixes, whether it's what do you call it? Whether it's for mixing from the house on my master bus or whether it's for in-ears. But for in-ears is incredibly good, Yeah, so I mean that's what I use for the most part. Of course, H delays, universal audio. I use some of that. I was just trying to recreate. This is obviously not the console that I use live, so I basically brought in some of the presets that I have from the console, and try to recreate something here in my studio. So I'm using all these plugins that I normally use live as well.
Okay, next question is asking, how do you create space in their in-ears?
There's a couple ways. One is, of course, having some form of room mic or any kind of, that's usually what an artist or mostly guitar players or drummers, they're looking for that room, that space, because when they're hearing an instrument that is amplified, like a guitar amp or a drum set, they're not hearing it. Their ear is not, like, say, on the snare drum. That's not where their ear is. It just sounds unnatural when you have a microphone there and then you put it in the in-ears. So you can either have a room mic or audience mics in this case that helps distance the source a little bit. But if that doesn't work, because that brings too much of the noise of the crowd and that distracts, then reverbs, definitely. But it doesn't have to be a large reverb. It could be a very short reverb just to try to recreate the distance between where the musician's standing and where his guitar amp is, per se, the source is. So anything that could help create a little bit of distance and space is always helpful. Anything to take away that direct sound.
Next question is asking, when you talk about recreating the ambiance of the venues for the artist mix, is that applied at individual inputs, or is this something you'd apply to the whole mix?
I do it by trying to apply it to whatever's their whole mix, but in reality, it's mostly on, if it's a vocalist, then it's on their voice. If it's a guitar player, chances are I'm adding it to the guitar. So I will say it's on inputs, but the way I try to balance it out, it's not that, I try to make it where it's not just their instrument that sounds like it's in this arena because they're in an arena, but also to make everybody sound that way. So it's almost, I don't apply a reverb to the whole mix, but it's almost like everybody gets their own little treatment, so they all sound like they're in the same environment. And then all together, collectively, they sound like they're in the same place.
And the next question is asking, how do you deal with RF?
That's a good question. I'm very fortunate to have Chris Sharpie Sharp. He's an amazing RF tech. He travels with me wherever I go. I used to have to deal with it on my own, and it was just too much because we're running, I believe, 58 or 60 channels of RF. So luckily I have him to do it. When I do other stuff like other artist projects that have a lot less wireless, not a problem. I just handle it myself. But I usually use Workbench which is Shure software to coordinate the wireless. I'm not an expert on wireless, but I just know enough to be able to handle, my world. I wouldn't do like an award show or anything like that, but yeah, just enough to do monitors and handle in-ears and microphones and things like that.
All right, next question is asking, I know you're a big Sennheiser IEM person. What's your go-to sensitivity?
I actually am not a Sennheiser user at all. I'm a Shure PSN 1000 user. And what I do normally, as far as sensitivity for that, my transmitter is a -12. That seems to be the gain that seems to work well the way, I guess, I don't know, the Avid consoles are calibrated. For me, -12 seems to translate to exactly what I'm doing on the console to the unit. So that works pretty good for me.
Okay, next question. Other than double patching inputs, do you have any tips for mixing monitors from front of house?
Well, there's just you can have, you're referring to the patch input you said? I'm sorry, because I'm getting a cut signal here, but
It said, other than double patching inputs, do you have
yeah.
any tips for mixing monitors from front of house?
Oh yeah. Well, you could. The difference is if you double patch them, you have more advantages as far as EQing and processing your inputs. You can process some that are for monitors. You can process some that are for front of house independently. The only thing that you'll be sharing is the gain because you're just double patching. That being said, if that's not a big concern, you can always run them, and if you have enough aux, you can always run them from the same inputs. But then you either, if you're going to have it post EQ, then whatever EQ you do for front of house will affect the monitors as well. So it's really a choice that you have to do depending on what you're trying to accomplish. If you have the ability to split it evenly, if you have whatever 24 inputs, and you have the ability that the console will handle another 24 inputs by double patching it, I will do it that way. I will keep them independent, so you can process monitors one way and process front of house a different way.
Okay, next question. When starting out a sound check, what is your mix output level in relation to how hot an artist has their belt pack set to?
Normally, it should be exactly the same. It's, we try to test it that way, and we try to encourage them to test it. Obviously, they know they're going to go a little louder maybe during the show, which is why I was telling them never start really loud. They already know where it sits for the show. So if anything, they might do soundcheck a little quieter on their body packs. I don't change anything coming out of the console. None of that changes. Maybe if they're just running through songs and they don't want to have that full show vibe, they might just turn themselves down and just play the song. But then for the show, they already have a predetermined level that they run it at. So that way we keep it consistent, because if they run it quiet and they start asking me for changes on the mix, then when the show comes and they put everything back to their normal level, everything will be out of order. So we know, like, I always even ask this, even during the sound check, if they go, hey, can I have more of this? Can I have more of that? I'm like, where's your pack? I'm like, oh yeah, right, my pack is down. So then they put the pack back and everything's the same. There's stuff that I haven't changed in years, and like the band sometimes shows up, they play a song for soundcheck 2 song, and they don't even ask for anything because it's been the same for years. So that's where the consistency comes in with everything I was saying earlier, to try to keep those variables to not change. Like, make sure those things are exactly the same wherever we go, to avoid that kind of stuff. And knowing that they have a predetermined level where they're set, then they'll identify right away if something's wrong, if something's not in the right place. They'll realize it right away because they're also used to that consistency.
All right, next question. What do you think we should focus on while EQing kick for punch and snare for attacks?
Well, the source. Start with that. Make sure you have a good mic. We use DPA mics. We have 2011 Cs and 4099s, and they sound great for that. But whatever mic you're using, just make sure it's the right placement. Make sure the snare sounds good. So you got to have a good source to start with. If you want snap out of the snare, a little bit of 5K will do it, and depending on what, like I said, what type of snare, then, but I think with a little 5K, you can get some snap. I personally like cutting a little bit of the mids to round it off, but if you're looking for that attacky snare, then don't cut the mids. And then for the kick drum, if you want a little punch, like I said, I'm very aggressive with EQ. I don't mind adding, 60 cycles to a kick drum, I usually want my channels to sound the way they're supposed to sound instead of having, like if you're mixing from a house or whatever, where the subs are just overwhelmingly loud and you actually end up cutting low end out of your kick drum. I believe that your channels should have a certain sound that on their own, they will hold itself up. Like it should translate to the PA, if straight up, or in this case, in ear. So if you want your kick to have more low end, then add the low end, just add it. And I will say for a nice round punch, I would say 60 cycles, and then maybe cut, the usual 300 or 400, just make a nice cut on that,
Okay, next question. Do you control the click track along with backing tracks when mixing live?
I don't control it in the sense that there's a separate person running that, but I do use it as far as I'm constantly mixing it up or down. Not for the musicians, not for the band. That's all part of the snapshots, but live, so let's say Enrique or Gwen, when they start, the click lives at a certain level when they're on stage. As they start making their way through the runway, it starts going, I go up with them, and as they make their way back, I restore it to the level that it was at, and I do that with any other instrument that they might need as they're on the runway. Same thing when Enrique goes to the C stage, same thing with the click, because if I was just to leave it on full blast the whole night, then it's fatiguing, especially that kind of sound, it's very fatiguing. So I'll just use it as they need it. If a song has plenty of beat, then I don't need the click too loud. I just leave it there for any kind of slate or anything that was in there, but that's it. And then when they need it, because of the noise of the PA bleeding through the mic or anything, then I'll just bring it in and then I'll bring it back.
Next question is asking, when you use talkback mics on stage, are you using noise gates?
No, because we use foot switches. So if the guitar player they get close, they hit the foot switch, they can continue to play, they can talk to me, and all the mics have an actual switch on it. So there's no gates needed, just a switch mic. And now there's, of course, with wireless, there's some wireless that you can put a piece on it that has a button that could turn into a talkback as well. But I'm not currently using that. We have talkbacks set up throughout the stage for different members, including Enrique.
Okay, next question. Do you mix on headphones or with monitors?
When I'm mixing monitors live, I'm mixing with in-ears, just like these. In fact, these are the ones that I use normally. When I'm mixing in the studio, I mix with monitors, and then I'll verify some stuff with headphones,
And then the follow-up to that is, what type of monitoring system do you prefer to work with?
I use Ultimate Ears, UE11s and UE7s is what my artists are mostly in UE11s and 7s. And they're great. They're really good. I've been using them for years, and they're very reliable. They fit comfortably, and I think they sound really good. And that's really ultimately what matters.
Okay, next question. How do you patch and run your talkbacks?
They come in like regular inputs. I route I route a few of them directly into my matrix. Like I have backline text. They also have their own talkbacks, and that helps me. Like if we have an issue, let's say a guitar went down or there's some kind of weird noise in the guitar, I can talk to them just by touching a button. I can talk just to the backline text, and we can be fixing something as the show is going on and nobody even knows we're working on something. We talk back and forth. I have because of my mix is going routed through a matrix, then I'm able to uh, put any kind of input over it. So I have the Q mix that goes through the matrix, that whatever talkback goes through the regular mix, I will hear. In this case, Enrique and musicians, I get them. And then the MD goes directly into my ears as well. Backline tech, lighting, stage managers, and the radios, they all go directly to my ears and not through the band members. Even though they're all coming into inputs in the console, they're routed to the matrix where my queue is. So they're on top of my queue. So that way nobody else hears it but me.
Okay, next question. Do you utilize the use of custom layers to help your workflow be more efficient? If so, can you break down some of your layer setup?
Yes, I do. Obviously, if I was to show you on the other console like the input 1-to-1, then obviously we have all not 80 something inputs. But then when I do the layouts, I have them where the stuff that I move the most, and it's usually towards the end is where I have all my Enrique channels, some of the tracks, guitars and keyboards, and then percussion and drums. You know, but a lot of times, for certain songs, I'll switch to another layout. Let's say we'll go to the acoustic set, and it's just percussion, guitars, and the vocals. Because that's what's being used there. So, but I usually keep everything in the same place. So Enrique will pop up in the same place, but then the other stuff will pop up like in the middle of the console. So yeah, depending on the song, I'll have a different layout. Currently, I think I'm only using really like 4 layouts that I'm switching manually. I haven't automated that because it's just 4 and I use them as I need them. But then I also have layouts of groups of things. So I have layouts that are, drums and percussion, guitars and keys, and, all background vocals, all my effects. So if I need to get somewhere quickly and I know I need to just do drums, I just click that and I have just the drums and percussion in front of me, and I can dial up mixes for people.
Okay, looks like we have time for one more question. What are your preferred RF, TX or RX?
Well, both. I'm using, you talk about transmitters and receivers, I use both. I obviously microphones, and the in-ears. So I'm basically everything we do is wireless. Everything we do is wireless. So the only thing that's hardwired is drums.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Eddie, for presenting on this session. It was really great information.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate everybody who attended today and all of your engagement with these questions. Sorry we couldn't get to everything, but if you have additional questions, you can feel free to reach out to Eddie. I think his contact information, yep, there it is up on the screen there. So you can reach out to him through his social channels or on his website. And for any of our upcoming sessions, you can find those out on our calendar on pro.harman.com. As I mentioned before, we have over 30 sessions scheduled for this fall and winter, so please join us for those. And thank you again, Eddie, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks for having
bye-bye.
me. Bye.